Chapter 5. Yay! All right, this chapter is going to focus a lot on how do we tell how biodiverse an ecosystem is, and we're also going to talk about some of the components and of evolution with that and how species and populations change over time. All right, so first of all, let me just say this. The slides here don't follow the chapter exactly because one, we have two different textbooks out there right now. You may have the old, you may have the new. But also too, I feel like this just flows a little bit better if I kind of introduce this part and then apply it. So first, let's just quickly do a little review of genetics. A lot of this you guys did in biology, obviously, either last year or a year or two ago. So a lot of this should be not new, just a refresher. So you know what evolution is. It's the change in the genetic composition of a population over time. I actually saw an interesting article where they're talking about how humans are currently undergoing a microevolution. That term is in the chapter. About losing their wisdom teeth and how slowly more and more people are being born without them. So it's kind of interesting. All right, what is the population? The population is the individuals that we are referring to a lot of times when we're talking about stuff in this chapter. You know what genes are, you know what alleles are. Genotype, that's the actual genome of the organism. And the phenotype is basically, think of it as what you see. So it's the consequences of what is written on the genotype. So you could have blue eyes or brown eyes or green eyes, etc. Now, let's talk about how genetics plays into really affecting organisms. Well, we have a gene pool. And say here, in your family, you have a gene pool. Within San Antonio, we have a gene pool. Worldwide, we have a gene pool, and it changes kind of dependent on where your specific population is. And we can have mutations, and those are just mistakes. Okay, so mutations are accidents, sometimes happy little accidents, and those mutations may create a new favored phenotype, or sometimes not. It can actually cause more harm than good. Recombination. Recombination is whenever the cell is undergoing division, part of the chromosome literally just kind of breaks off and attaches to another, and it's like, snap, oh, I'm going to reconnect here. It's like building Legos, pop two apart, and it gets connected separately on a different one. Artificial selection, we humans love to do this. I really think the best example of that are all the different breeds of dogs and cats that are out there, fish, those kinds of things. We love to artificially select for our pets and for our food. We'll talk about that as well. And sometimes you can have unintended consequences. So some plants that they have bred for specific traits, they actually have become pesticide or herbicide resistant. So some weeds have developed the ability to say, you don't have to kill me, Roundup. I'm stronger than you. Or some actual crop plants as well. Biodiversity. So biodiversity is the variety of all the different species and all the different life forms, anything from the little microbes all the way up to secondary and tertiary consumers, to the big guys up here like us. And it's all about how do we live together? How do we process energy throughout? And how do we sustain life? How do we do that? And what we're going to talk about is you need to know what ecosystem diversity is versus species diversity, population diversity, and genetic diversity. Okay, so there's an important mechanism of all this, and this is evolution. And we know that science has shown us that organisms have derived over time from ancient ancestors, and sometimes you can see absolute amazing similarities amongst a group of organisms, or you can also see the differences as well. And that's one of the ways that we have been able to adapt and change over time to best fit our own environments. And we all know the grand old man who is responsible for the concepts of this is Charles Darwin. I'm sure you remember him from biology. He did an amazing amount of research, and he went to the Galapagos Islands, and he did all this really cool stuff. One weird fact, he liked to eat everything he studied. So kind of odd, but anyways. And he also noticed that it's not just the change in the individual, like the one single turtle, that really makes a difference. It's the change in the population over time as generations are propagated. And that's where that change is really evident and maybe beneficial. So one of the things he came up with is the concept of phylogeny, or phylogenetic trees, to show that there are common ancestors, and as some species continue to evolve and develop, you can see over time how similar and how different they are from one another. So for instance, you can see here that this common ancestor of all the fish, right? And then you have the lampreys. Oh, they're gross. You have down here, it breaks off into the cartilaginous fishes like sharks, catfish. And then you have the ray-finned fishes, which are what we really know of as mostly fishes. Then you have your lobed finned fishes. And what they think is that lobed finned fishes then started to evolve into legs and into appendages. So that's where we get our amphibians, because they migrated from the water out onto land and they spend some time of their life in water. Then we break off and we get further and further away from the lampreys. Yeah, they're pretty simple. So, but you can also tell here that reptiles are closely related to birds because they have a very short degree of separation here. So you need to understand some of the differences in the vocabulary here. So first, let's talk about what natural selection is. And individuals, a lot of individuals produce way too many offspring, okay? That is what we would probably call an R strategist. I always think of R meaning like a rat or a roach. They create lots of babies, not many survive. So R strategists tend to really follow this idea and this concept in science. And individuals, they differ in their traits. That's variability in their genes. And sometimes also natural selection can be as a result of mutations. And there are, like I said, there are disorders and illnesses that are examples of this, but then there are really cool things too that people and other organisms can adapt. So you can have what they call, like, you can be like almost the opposite of albino, where you are very what they call melanistic and your skin tone is extremely, extremely dark. There's alligators and there's lots of mammals. There's different species. It's rare, but it is a mutation. Environments can't necessarily support unlimited population growth. We will talk about that in a few units up. But you do definitely, as individuals reproduce, some reach their full potential and then they continue to reproduce and propagate those genes. Others, not so much, right? So some people may not be able to have children, some people may. Traits are passed off to offspring, concept of heredity. It's not that if you cut your hair, then your child's hair will be short. That's not the way it works. And in science's notion, best interest, we want those advantageous, those positive, those good traits to be passed along. And so therefore, hopefully it would become more common in the total population. And so that's kind of where natural selection plays out. There's all sorts of instances. I have about 3 or 4 examples in my head right now of where you could see this just by looking outside. Broadleaf trees have big leaves because it allows them to capture more sunlight, right? That's an example of that. So natural selection doesn't occur just on the single individual, right? So it's kind of going back to Darwin's concept, but in total populations, and it does take time. There also can be changes like in the environment that can lead to adaptations. There could be changes. So like as we're experiencing global warming, some organisms have already began to adapt slightly in response to temperature changes. It's going to be a very slow process. It's not immediate. Now, whether or not they would be able to do so at a rate to keep up with the climate change, that is up for nobody knows. Nobody knows. I'll stop with this slide before we move on to the next one. There are obviously limitations to all of this. So you do have some organisms that they can adapt. You have organisms that may not be able to adapt, and they're the ones that are more likely to die. One example of a situation where you could see natural selection at work is whenever organisms become resistant to an antibiotic or an antiviral. You may think of bugs, but my first thought is bacterial infections. There are bacterial infections that are becoming more and more resilient. They are building resistance to the most common antibiotics that are on the market to treat them, and some of them are just fighting back, and some of them are winning. Some of them are winning. All right, so I'm going to stop it here, and we'll move on to the next one.